hope that you're well these days. It's nice to see you all again, and welcome to it's our seventh episode today of Sondervous, and it's part two of a the recording we did last time, which was on relationships. That time we discussed what do relationships mean to us? What have we learned about relationship over the years? And kind of the formative relationships that we had with our parents growing up as young children, what those relationships caused us to believe about ourselves, about who we needed to be, and how that kind of impacted us as we grew up and went into our early relationships as young women. So today we're going to pick that up and continue to discuss that more. Yeah. How have you been recently, Vix?
Oh, it's been busy. I said, kind of closing the year down. It's already November. It's crazy.
Mm,
I guess things have been quite hectic, with holidays coming up and, school and everything. And obviously, a lot of political activity recently. So that's yeah, it's been interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
And I said, I know you've been busy too. Just our sisterly talks have kind of like dropped off, and I'm like, I know her schedule is starting to ramp up.
Yeah.
Uh, the work
Yeah.
you're doing and the study you're doing.
hmm Yeah, that's true. It does seem like there's been a lot happening. And
Yeah.
even, I mean, whether our calendar or our schedules look busy, or even just kind of like you were talking about the climate of, what's happening for ourselves as families, and then in the country, and then kind of like on a bigger scene. Yeah. Um, I've kind of noticed, yeah, I have pulled back a little bit just in noticing that it feels like a lot's going on. And I don't want to kind of fall into similar patterns that I have before. Whereas, before things would get busier and I would get busier in order to kind of match or fill that space. But now, at this time in my life, I'm realizing, I really don't want to do that, or I want to try something different. I don't want to always feel the need to have to fill in the blank. I don't know if things have kind of been like that for you.
Same, totally the same for me. Like you said, it's not yet things are busy, but it's not like crazy busy, nothing like double the amount of work. But it does feel, I think, with the seasons change and my body is like hibernation mode, making soup and staying on the, time, daylight savings time. So it gets dark at 5 o'clock here now. It's cold. Yeah, I just kind of go into my little hibernation and I'm making food and I just want to be with my family. And like you said, also kind of just the outside world kind of feels just very heavy right now, even though I'm not like literally going out, but just kind of the environment with all the stuff that's been going on politically, it's been really feels very heavy and
Yeah.
very almost like it's not safe to go out into the world because you don't know what's going to happen. And so I don't know if other people have been feeling that way.
Mm.
Um, but I like same thing. Like before, I used to kind of like, well, let's keep busy. When my mind starts getting anxious, I'm like, let's keep busy. Let's try to not feel all that stuff. But now I've realized the benefit of just being like, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit anxious. I'm feeling a little bit uncertain. Okay, I'm going to do more self care and I'm going to be spending more time in connection with the people that care about me, kind of reminding yourself like you don't have to carry all this stuff alone.
Mm.
And yeah, for me, I've realized, and I brought this up with my therapist that, ooh, I have this pattern of when things start to get a little bit uncertain for me, I tend to get busy and it tends to burn me out. And then I'm just like sick and I'm like, what's wrong with me? And I feel probably even more depressed that now I'm have a lot to do because I've accepted all these things that or all these to-do lists and I'm not able to do it now because I don't have the energy. I burnt myself out. And then I start feeling like I'm not good enough and affects my self-worth. So kind of like you said, realizing that was a previous pattern and I do that. And now I'm going to choose to be a bit more nurturing, a bit more compassionate to myself. And, things don't have to get done right now. I think that's what I used to tell myself. It has to be done right now. But yeah, realizing that it doesn't have to, it doesn't really affect my self worth and value. And kind of almost not indulging myself, but being like, yeah, I'm a 30. I just had my birthday last month, but I'm almost 40 years old now. I can afford to be like a a housewife sitting, not housewife, but someone sitting on the sofa and eating, cookies and drinking tea and watching movies with my husband, and that's okay. So I
Yeah.
don't know. New persona I'm embracing. Yeah.
Yeah. There is something so healthy about that. I
Mm.
think that as you do get older and you do learn and you do just you practice mindfulness, you start to notice things and just be more self-aware. And for me, it's noticing that actually, look, the world's just going on just fine without me. I don't have
Right.
to like
Yeah.
try to keep up. And like you mentioned, self-worth and feeling like your value is attached to how much you contribute or how many times you go out or how much you're on the world stage or showing up at things. And you realize, is that really is that really where I want to be? Is that where I want to put my energy? Or do I just want to kind of, like you said, nurture yourself, nurture your family relationships, nurture your own little space? Sometimes that is the best thing we can do. And you just kind of take time to step back and notice and just slow down a little bit. Yeah. So yeah, it has been definitely me just taking a moment to slow down. But it is nice again then to reconnect, to be like, okay, let's continue to work on those projects we said we were going to
Yeah.
do because those are really meaningful as well. And yeah,
It's
we
a
can't give.
balance. That's the whole thing. It's all about balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we are going to pick up where all right, my papers are rustling here, paper, where we left off last time. So last time, some of the questions that we asked were, what is your understanding of relationship? How has your understanding changed or evolved over time? We talked a little bit about our family history, forming our first relationship with primary caregivers, and how those relationships affected our relationships with others in our lives, like our friendship and romantic partners. So what we wanted to do in this episode was pick up where we left off and discuss like Vicky and I have both been in therapy. We have, off and on for the past several years, we have been doing a lot of, self-directed study based on trauma and based on what that looks like. How did it happen? How is it still impacting us? And what will it feel like and what will it look like once we know we've healed from that or we are, in the process of healing? So then how does that, when we've done all that work, and that work is really, really hard, and it doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes it seems that just when you've kind of reached a place where you've made it, is like, boom, no, there's another huge mountain there. You're like, oh, why? Um, yeah, so I think a lot of us along that journey, we're just like, it's enough, just enough already. We're not going to continue. And we kind of, maybe just stop or give ourselves a breather or give ourselves an excuse not to continue. And we do need a rest. But I think what you and I have learned, Vix, over time is that we take that time of rest, we take that time of like a bit of reprieve, and then we get back into it. And we can like, we're passionate about it. We're passionate about our healing and our relationships because we know what it's like to have dysfunctional relationships, to have chaos, to have trauma. And like we said, we want better for ourselves, for our children, for our families. We know that we're deserving of it. And so we're like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do that work. I mean, so often we're so willing to do so much work for other people and other things, but not even for ourselves and not even for, our own family members. So, yeah, we're doing the work and in this episode we'll talk more about like how then does that manifest for ourselves, our family members, our loved ones. I'm not sure why I'm getting this notification. I'm gonna turn that off. Yeah. So, the first question here is, how did our childhood relationships or other things impact the relationships that we've had with our own children?
Mm.
So I'll let you go first on this one, Vix.
Oh, childhood relationships. I guess it's almost like looking at myself and my relationship to myself when I was a child.
Hmm.
And so many little pieces of the person who I was as a child, seeing it come out gradually in and I've got two boys, right? So, well, two bio sons, right? Yeah, it was just noticing little pieces of um, my personality in my boys as they were growing up, and also noticing like what was similar and also what was completely different. So, for example, my oldest boy, I think was a bit more like me, kind of quite sensitive and really sweet and soft, um, probably quite cautious of things. And my younger boy was like, more like his dad, I think quite brash and quite seemingly quite confident and really easy to make friends. And I'm just like, part of me was like, oh, where do you get that? First of all, where do you get that from? Because I'm still, not really like that. I guess I relate more with my older boy of kind of being a bit more cautious about things. Um, but then also noticing like certain sensitivities and things like that were very similar to me. Um, and things that I guess I brushed off when I was a child, or like they're not, or I was told maybe they were not important, right? Rather than, I guess I did think they were important, but I was told by parents or adults or teachers that they weren't important. I shouldn't have been placing so much attention to them, or I was even wrong for having those traits, right? Like being highly sensitive. And then recognizing, oh, my son has that as well, right? My boys have that as well. And instead of, well, I remember how I felt as a child being told that this was bad to have and it was wrong and that it was going to damage me in my relationship with others, was going to hinder me. And realizing, like, actually, as an adult now, I know that it didn't hinder me. The belief that I thought it was bad hindered me. But when I'm healed and starting to understand that it's actually a trait that I have, it's a really beautiful trait. Like I talk about me being highly sensitive. And I wish someone had told me that as a child. I wouldn't have gone through my entire teens and 20s being super embarrassed about this part of myself. So I'm going to do the opposite for my boys. I'm going to come with more knowledge and teach them, hey, this is a part of your life that may be a little bit uncomfortable. It makes you a little bit different from others, but it's actually a really beautiful trait. And I'm going to nurture it in you and teach you, first of all, the pitfalls of things to look out for of having this trait, but also the beauty in it and how you don't have to be embarrassed. And of course, as boys, it's even tougher for them because, crying at school all the time, my younger boy's like, I get make fun of when I cry at school. And so teaching them that just because they have these traits and people react in a certain way to them does not make it wrong. It just means there needs to be more awareness. And also, it's part of their job, I guess, to help educate their friends. And it's okay for boys to show emotion and cry and to be empathetic to others. Like we don't have to be all tough and strong. And so it's almost like a fight with the world versus what I'm telling them. And it's kind of tough, right? Because I'm like, I see now why 30 years ago I was taught this. Because look, 30 years later, people are still teaching this. And I'm going, no, that's wrong. It's not bad. It's just, for me, I feel it's not, people don't know enough about it. And I talk with a couple parents who have neurodivergent kids, and they're saying the same thing, how they go into schools and schools are, kids who struggle with these differences are being told that they're wrong or that they're bad or that they're insufficient in some way, rather than adjusting the world to fit their needs, or at least some part of the world to fit their needs. I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, it's I feel it goes beyond just what the relationship I have with my boys, and it kind of goes into the world. And well, the world's telling me this, but you're telling me this, mom. Which one's right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've got to deal with this world every single day. But I come home and you're telling me that it's okay to be this way. And what do I have? How can I balance the two? Right? Do
Mm,
I pretend when I go into the world? Do I pretend with you? Like, I don't know. So that's
yeah.
kind of why I'm finding these conversations are coming up more with my son.
The fact that you're able to have those conversations with your sons and with kids, I think that's huge because like you said, you can't necessarily change the world for your kids or for the kids that you work with. But the fact that they know someone sees them, someone validates their experience, that gives such a huge sense of, yeah, I'm okay in who I am in, I think that sometimes it's easy to overlook or minimize the role that that plays, but it
Yeah.
does. And even if that's all they have, I mean, I'm just thinking to you as a little girl and the stories that you've told, and that no one was there to, hold your experience and help you make sense of it and help you understand it. And then that led you to develop all these things about yourself, but you're actually having those conversations. So you can't change the world, you can't change things. It's not going to be, how you wish it could be for them. But there is at least that one person or those conversations that are they're so meaningful and so impactful. And I feel like if we had those, even a couple of those conversations, I can't remember hardly any of those conversations, or maybe
Conversation,
there were
definitely.
one or two people that you and I can remember, and we remember that one adult or that one individual who took a little bit of time or who spared a few words. And
Yeah.
that made such a huge difference. So,
And for me, especially when it starts with kids saying it to their peers, for me, that's more powerful than any teacher coming in and giving some big lecture because they're going to be like, oh, yeah, here's another teacher saying this, but look at my peers. That's not what my peers are telling me. Right. So that's always why I said it starts with us first and then it ripples out gradually in those little changes. And so I know you just said like we can't change the world. We can. It's just a lot slower and not as widespread as we would like it to be and what would make it easier for our kids sometimes. So
right, right. As you were talking about understanding yourself as a child and then noticing the traits in your own boys as they were young, I thought of myself with Jane. So she's just my daughter. She's just turned 4, and there are so many things about her personality which just make me want to pull my hair out. She is very strong-willed, very independent. She knows her mind, and she is just go, 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 nonstop, always asking questions, always needing and wanting and desiring, and just a really high needs kid. But in a way, because she's growing and she wants to learn about the world. And for me, sometimes I'm like, oh God, will you please just give mommy a break? And as you're saying this now, I'm thinking, yeah, what are those times where that's the messaging that I got when I was a kid, like, Michelle, you are too much. Big mouth, monkey wrench, just all those things. Too inquisitive, too boisterous, too. And I realize, wow, I'm like kind of sending that same messaging to her a lot of the time. And I don't mean to, it's just so true in the moment. But
but
it's,
I
yeah,
you were probably super I because I'm trying to think now. Yes, apart from you, I'm trying to think of you as my sister as like a 4-year-old. I'm saying I would have been 2, but I can remember you being like loud, inquisitive, and always asking questions. Of course, probably when I started having more memories, it was probably later on when you were 8, 9, 10. Probably when you had that messaging for about 5 years. If you're too much, be quiet, sit down, stop asking questions. And
yeah,
so, I mean, our kids, apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I'm wondering actually how similar Jane is
yeah.
to how you probably were as a 4-year-old. Yeah.
I think I give people a hard time, but then even that messaging, I gave people a hard time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So where is that coming from? And how am I sending that messaging still to her? And so, yeah, I think there's probably a lot more personal work for me to do as far as that. I'm too much. I'm just a lot to handle. It's just like, and but it's having these conversations where you start to like, oh wow, that sounds like me. And then you start
Mm,
to kind of see, well, how am I still sending that messaging? So I guess as in same-sex children,
yeah.
it's easy to see more of that. Like I'm thinking back to my boys, so Ryan and Broderick, who are now 19 and 21, and I'm thinking about to the way they were when they were kids. Um, and it's just, again, kind of seeing the very stark difference between the ways that mothers raise their boys to the ways that mothers raise their girls, and I guess, vice versa, fathers, daughters, fathers, sons, this sort of a thing. And also the age that you're at where you have your kids. So I was 19 when I gave birth to my oldest son, who's now 21, and I was 21 when I gave birth to my second son, who's now 19. So I was still a kid. I was still, a girl
Yeah.
myself, and there's so much about myself that I didn't know. And when I go back to like those years, they almost like breeze past. Like, as in childhood, sometimes, a whole year passes and you're like, wow, time just flew like that, right? And in a way, it's like I wish I could go back and relive some of those moments, those really key moments with them. Of course, I have super beautiful memories with them, but because of how young I was and where I was at in my life, I experienced them in a completely different way than the way that I'm experiencing Jane now. And yeah, so I mean, being a young mother, there's also a lot of benefits to that, right? You're almost like you have the energy. You're kind of, in a way, for us as well, not having a lot of, you could say, very normal or mainstream childhood experiences because of the way that we were raised and grew up. So having my boys and then being able to do and experience a lot of the things that maybe I hadn't even as a child, it was almost a first time experience for me. So in that way, I mean, you can't say that one is wrong or one is right. It's just a different experience, right? And I think there was a lot of beauty and there was a lot of, really fun, amazing moments. And they always, in hindsight, when they look back on their childhood, they always say, "You guys were great parents. You guys did so much for us. Just had such a great time." So there was a lot of that. At the same time, I think I missed a lot of their childhood because I was still young myself and
Hmm.
still so needy. Whereas I think with Jane, I can be a lot more curious and mindful and notice her own childhood experience and development because I can separate her childhood from my childhood, which is just a very, very different experience. And yeah, I don't know how has it been for you because I know you have stepchildren as well, and that's a completely different dynamic in itself.
Completely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't get that kind of almost second chance. I kind of wished I would, you know. Oh, then I was like, oh, I'm done. Five kids is enough. Blended family. Um, but yeah, I almost wished that I'm like, oh, now that I know all this stuff, right? I had my kids pretty early as well, 21 and 25, I think. Can't remember. Yeah, I think so. And kind of like you said, almost being a child yourself in a way, and us not having much of a childhood, kind of just
I
listening to what parents say in these moments of I wish I'm going to give my child all these things I never had, and I'm going to be a different kind of parent for my child than I had as a child. um, just shows how much was lacking in our own childhood, even though we, had all the basics. We had a roof over our head. We had food. We had two parents who were there most of the time, right? Not divorce, I guess, wasn't super common as it is now.
Mhm.
Um, but still, there was so much lacking in terms of emotional awareness and just even presence, right? Just parents were just like got like talking about latchkey kids and more like the 80s. So I talked to my husband about this, and it's just like, yeah, my parents were just like gone and we just raised ourselves basically. And I guess for us, even though we weren't latchkey kids, we had a totally different experience where we were very, very parentified, and we did have to raise ourselves and our younger brothers and sisters and take on a lot of parental role in terms of raising money and cleaning and cooking and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we didn't really, I guess, have much of a childhood. And so it's really tempting to be like, I'm going to give my child everything. And I'm going to kind of say, give them the experiences that I wish I had. And some of that is, I wish I didn't have to grow up so fast. So almost, I'm going to keep my children dependent on me as long as possible sometimes, right? And well, my older boy's in England, so it's kind of difficult to do that. But sometimes I do catch myself feeling like that, where I know I'm raising a young man, for example, my bio son who's 12. And at sometimes I'm just like, I just want to be like, he's my last. I want to baby him. I want him to be like, and I'm like, nope, responsible young man. Oh, baby, And so it's that back and forth of, wanting to do things for your kids, but also realizing that your job as a parent is to make them not need you anymore. And so that back and forth. And then, of course, you're all your own childhood trauma of, I wish I had a caring parent who did that for me or a caring adult who did that for me. So I'm going to do it for my kid. And like you said, there becomes a little bit of a mix of what you needed as a child versus what your child actually needs. And they have a completely different childhood to what we have. So their needs probably aren't the same. And kind of being aware of that, which is tough for a lot of people to do of, wait, how much of this is, like you said, a little bit of transference of my own needs and what I wish I had as a child and what my child actually needs, like what's actually good for them versus what was good for me. And what I think they need as a this kind of neglected child myself.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's like so many steps, but I think later on we're talking about relationships, and a lot of it when I talk about like kind of the healing and the growing up and the relationships, it is about realizing that most of us, not this generation of kids, but most of like our probably 30s and 40s now have have had probably pretty neglectful childhoods. Even if they weren't abusive, outright abusive, they were probably pretty neglectful. And many of us have this real need to be, and I'm going to bring this funny story in about some people may laugh at it, but for me, I'm like looking at it more from a, ooh, why that? And why are people gravitating towards it? I think it was some university that, after the election and people having a really hard time with it, their students having a really hard time with it, are creating like little comfort rooms where they're having milk and cookies and Lego sessions, right? And you're thinking, these are friggin' university students. Like, what the hell? Like, what are you talking about? But you're thinking, if people's, basic need for safety is threatened, and it's like, oh my goodness, all this stuff is going on in the world, I don't feel safe. They are almost going to revert back to, I need milk and cookies and a Lego session to feel safe. And so, yes, we can laugh at it because it seems so ridiculous, but why are people actually going into these rooms? Are they big snowflake babies, or are they like neglected inner children and they need that nurturing? And it
Mm,
seems super weird, and because they're full grown humans in going to university, but yet they're behaving like kindergartners. And it just
mm,
shows how quick us, moms who can do everything, and then our inner child comes out when our child triggers us, right? And we start behaving like a child ourselves. And so, yeah, it's
there's so
it's
much of that behaving
so
like
much of that in the world. Yes.
ourselves. And that is really fascinating that if we didn't receive those very fundamental needs for safety and security and to be delighted in and to be pursued by our parents, we may have suppressed it for years and years and think, everything's all good in the hood, but then something triggers us and we're right back there and we
We're
need to kind of go
eating our
back.
milk and cookies. Yeah.
Exactly. Wow, that's really something to think about. And it kind of makes you think we all have a lot of work to do then on our very neglected inner child who still needs milk and cookies. And it's not a bad thing, but then you just have to think like, okay, it's okay if you've got your little Legos there and you're eating your milk and cookies, but in other places and spaces when you're not there, how are you acting like a big child? And how are your needs not being met? It
Yeah.
begs to ask a lot of questions. So, yeah, hmm, that's interesting. Um, yeah, I was kind of thinking about as we do the work on, as parents, now that we're grown up, how does that impact our relationship with our kids now that they're a little bit older? So I was thinking about my relationship with Ryan and Broderick, and their father and I separated when they were 10 and 12. And I had so much hidden, unknown, um, trauma, or just, some areas which were just, I just, I never could have known that those were big, huge issues in my life that kind of led to our separation and divorce, and then which consequently led to them actually developing, having to experience the trauma of separating parents and, a broken marriage and a broken family. But it wasn't until I think probably, let me see, well, from the time 2016 until I would say just maybe recently, like a year or two ago, where I've done all this work and now where I'm realizing I'm in a better place where maybe, I've had my milk and cookies and my Lego and I've done the work, and you can kind of, you've taken care of your inner child, and that puts you to a place where you're like, oh wow, how have I then, as a mother, how has my own trauma and all those areas I was neglected and brushed to the side and abandoned and rejected as a child, how then has that impacted my parenting? And then the next place you look is the only place you can't really look is at your own kids, because they're the ones who you were responsible for and they're the ones who you really hurt. So I came to a point where I was like, oh my word, how much have I hurt my own boys because of my own struggles? And that's not, to blame my parents or to blame myself. That's just to acknowledge and say, yeah, that happened. That's how it impacted me. That's what I did. And I think for we as parents, we have to do that work, that is on us. Um, and I think it's really good to look at it both ways, like my parents did this to me and there are things that I need to work out with them on this level. And there's always an and. And that's why I think people kind of get it wrong, where they think it ends there and you're kind of absolved and there's nothing. If there's a that, then there's also a that or a that or a that. And that's what we need to be looking at in our relationships. If someone else hurt us, which is going to happen because that's what we do as humans in our relationship, we're going to get hurt, right? And what happens? And then we go and hurt others. So then I had to go and look at all the other relationships from that point and say, okay, first, of course, I want to look for my boys because, at a certain point or until a certain point, they're vulnerable and they will always have that mother-child relationship with me. And so, yes, I owe that to them because I brought them into this world, and I want to do right by them, just like, I want my parents to do right by me or them by me. Anyhow, just as I wanted to go this way, I also wanted to go this way. So I felt like, okay, if I can do the work with them, I can't change everything. Like we're saying, we can't change everything. What can I do? What is in my power? What can I control? And then I just, started to have conversations with them. And even for them, I think, they are so concerned about my feelings. Oh no, mom, you were great. No, you were so good. No, 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 because, they love me and they don't want to upset or hurt or jeopardize our relationship. But if that relationship is built on something that isn't really true, then what is the function? What is the purpose? And what is the strength of that relationship? And how is that relationship going to help them create relationships for themselves in the futures? These are young men who are going to have, relationships. They're going to have marriages. They're going to have, whether, they're going to have relationships with their bosses, with other employees, with other. How is my relationship with them going to impact that for better or for worse? So, yeah, they want to protect it with me and they're like, no, mom, it was all good. But you can't just take that at face value. You then have to say, yeah, okay. And I also wasn't, maybe we had these beautiful memories together, but I also wasn't there for you then. And I know I also hurt you then. And it actually means like a commitment to come back to that conversation again and again and let them know that you're not going anywhere. You're going to be there to have those difficult conversations and to hold them. And it does take time and trust, I think, in maybe just having a lot of small talk to talk about the little things, the things that are interesting to them, the things that they're into. And they're like, wow, she's really here. She's really interested. She's not just here to kind of keep the status quo with me. She really wants to be here for me, to go deeper and then to kind of deal with. So even over the course of 2 years, it started with me, first of all, broaching that conversation and saying, yeah, I hurt you. I'm really sorry. I remember when you were crying and I couldn't hold you and I couldn't be there for you because I was too wrapped up in my own. And for them saying, oh, it was okay, mom, it was fine. I'm like, well, maybe it wasn't, but we can come back to it. It took 2 years for them to actually get to the point where I remember there was this one time where we were on holiday recently and they came and they visited. And it was late at night. We had, I put Jane to bed and I think they had gone out, they had a meal and they had some drinks and they had a bit of a tiff between themselves. They came back to the hotel room. They were really upset. They were, I could see that there was conflict between them. Uh, One was in one room, one was in the other. And I went to one and then we hashed it out, meaning there were huge tears, there was crying, there was a lot of huge emotion with one and then the other. But I felt like at that moment, they finally trusted me enough to let go of all those barriers and be like, yeah, I'm angry, mom. I'm hurting. These things happen, those things happen. And for me to just be like, yeah, I get it. I get it. And I can't change any of that. I'm so sorry. And here I am. Let me give you a hug and we're going to work through things together. So that just, it took time and it took coming back to that conversation again and again and again. And I think like as parents and as mothers, we want to do that for our kids. At the end of the day, we want to. Yeah. So I'm just going to stop talking now.
No, that was so I love that. 'Cause I mean, obviously I knew that they came over to visit you, and then you mentioned there had been some hard conversations, but it is interesting how I'm kind of thinking about our own personalities and our own relationship with our parents and how from what I've seen and people I've talked to, there seem to be kind of one of two, and I don't know if it's like a journey and like a spectrum, but kind of a if it's a personality thing or if it's like part of the journey and you as you go along your journey of healing you encounter different parts of yourself and you behave in a certain way with your parents and it affects the dynamic. Um, but how I probably like when we were starting up all this stuff, and I was starting my own therapy 4 years ago, and I was like starting to uncover this stuff about my own childhood, and then to what extent were my parents responsible for these things, and then like how much how angry was I at them, and all this stuff, and I was just like, yeah, I guess I understand, that they didn't make good decisions, that led us to being born and raised in this cult. But at the same time, I understand that they had their own experiences. And this was before actually I knew mom's kind of longer history in the past. I only found that out recently. But kind of like, I want to preserve that relationship, right? I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize her. I'm talking mainly about mom here because she's the one I've got the closest relationship with. I don't want to jeopardize anything. I don't want her to feel bad. Kind of the same thing. I need to protect her feelings. I don't want her to feel bad. I know she did her best. Yes, I can admit to myself that there were times probably she could have done better, or there were decisions she made, maybe either consciously or unconsciously, that led to us being hurt. But at the same time, like it kind of wasn't her fault. Like almost making excuses in an attempt to preserve this relationship or this connection with her. But like you said, unless it's based on truth, what kind of relationship is it? Is it based on lies? Like, yeah, what kind of first of all, it's not doing me any favors. And also, it's not doing her any favors unless I'm actually honest with her about my experiences and how it did affect me. Um, but at the same time, I think people can go to the complete opposite extreme where everything is that and anything that happens in your life, it's my parents' fault. Look at them. They didn't provide for me. And now I'm stuck in this. And I guess a lot of people I talk to, that's the state they're in. It's almost like I know my life is I'm 40 something years old. I've got 20 something year old kids of my own. And every mistake that I made and every mistake that my kids made, somehow my parents are to blame for it. And I'm just like, you got 40 years to deal with this stuff. Like, how I understand your parents are responsible somewhat, but you are an autonomous adult. How much of like when is the blaming going to stop? Right. And so I guess I saw a lot of that, which is why I think I went to the opposite extreme, was like, no, everything is on me and I can't blame my parents for anything. And so, like you said, there is a balance, right? There is having conversations with your parents and receiving a little bit of that acknowledgement, but at the same time, not using that acknowledgement as a carte blanche. Okay, not everything that goes wrong in my life, it's down to my parents, right? Because you just end up being a perpetual child. Everything is your parents' fault. And for me, I'm like, that's not maturity. That's being a child. But at the same time, part of growing up and being an adult is acknowledging, hey, there are some things that didn't work for your relationship and that were actually pretty harmful. And you can't just patching it over and because you don't want your children to do the same to you. If you're a responsible parent that wants the best for your child, you're going to want them at some point to be honest with you and be like, hey, mom, and you did this thing and actually really hurt me. Parents, if I went to my parents and told them about this thing, how would I want them to respond? And if my child comes to me, I need to first be that model. And if I can't do that, how can I expect my parents to do that? Right?
Yeah, for sure. It's really amazing that when you do take accountability and responsibility for your own actions and take steps to right what you can, some things are out of your control, but you mentioned it before, how there's something that happens, but there's something it sets up a chain of events where all of a sudden you starting to get messages or receive phone calls or out of the blue, you know that you've been doing the work and you're putting your focus and your energy in that direction and things fall into place. And so I think like from having conversations and doing the work for ourselves and then with our own children and realizing, wow, I can do that. It's given me a lot of confidence as well, knowing that I can help to make my children's life better, even though I made mistakes. And yes, I did hurt them, apologizing to them and opening the conversation up and saying, I'm here for you. I can't change the past, but I am here for you in the present, and seeing what a difference that makes to them and how it changes the quality of our relationships. It then gives you confidence to like, hey, first, I want that with my parents. Because a lot of people just say, no, I don't want it. But when you see how much your kids want that from you and with you, how then could it not extend in the other direction, right? And you realize, actually, I do want that relationship with my parents. That is natural. Every child is always going to want, in a healthy, normal relationship, you're going to want to have that connection with your parents. And then, is it possible? Yeah, it is, because it worked that way and it can go that way as well. So I think there's something that's very empowering about then bringing up to your parents. And that's kind of like the next, the next, I don't know, layer. So working on ourselves, working on our relationship with our kids, and then what does that mean for our relationship with our parents? Um, yeah, I think for me, it took a lot of conversations. The same thing as for my boys, bringing things up to them, kind of when I was in a state like, oh my gosh, I realized the truth of how it impacted me. And then thinking, okay, I have to bring this to them because they need to know. And then not being in a position where they could accept it, and me kind of almost forcing the issue a little bit, but in a way it kind of needed to be forced because I needed to establish boundaries. So it's kind of like in raising your voice for the first time, you are breaking the status quo. You are saying it was wrong and it needs to be said and it is uncomfortable. And some of us do it right and many of us don't do it right. And I was one of the ones who didn't do it right, but I wouldn't have changed it because I think that sometimes you need to say things, you need to upset things. There needs to be a rupture in that dysfunctional relationship. And it was based on dysfunction. It was based on a lot of falsehoods, a lot of things that, you know, abuse in a way, and abuse in the sense that when you're mistreating or misusing others for whatever reason, maybe because of your own traumas, that was what the relationship was built on. And so it kind of, there's no nice, neat, perfect, way to kind of upset all of that. So I kind of had to do that with them and did have to put my boundaries with them and did have to say almost like for about a year, pretty much go no contact. Not no contact as in I'm cutting you off. I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you, but we need time and space,
Yeah.
and that is really hard. But there needs to be kind of just a separation of almost like the enmeshed dysfunction of who we are. There needs to be kind of that rupture, and that I'm doing a lot of body language here, and given time and space for people to just be like, yeah, what was that about?
Mm.
Why is she feeling that way? What am I feeling? And what I've noticed also in a current relationship is that when you give time and space and you're not forcing issues anymore, nature happens. Nature in a good way, in a good sense, that what is meant to be will be. And when we're always trying to force it, when we're always trying to push and to have those conversations and to kind of create a certain outcome, you're not giving time and space to heal or to process. And I think that's been a huge theme for me in a lot of my relationships is just letting and being. And I think if the world did that at this point, it would help a lot.
Yeah. I almost feel like we get the message that it needs to be like there's this almost impatient, like needs to be done right now. And like a lot of the situations I'm seeing, or people I'm seeing have these conversations with their parents aren't like 80, 90, they're not dying anytime soon, right? The parents are in their 50s or 60s maybe. And there is time to have these conversations. And but like you said, it takes almost upsetting the apple cart and disrupting the status quo of there needs to be a rupture because you are what I kind of understand it as you're breaking the you're not a child anymore. You are a grown adult. You can't have the same relationship that you had as a child. You are an autonomous adult. You should be, right? We're talking about maturity and coming to people with your, like in the last episode, coming to people with your cup and saying, meet my need. You're not a child anymore. It feels good to still have that, to know someone cares enough about you to fill that cup as a parent child. But if they don't, still having that expectation of your parents as a child toward a parent instead of as an adult child, a fully autonomous adult toward another adult. Really, it's you're two adults. Yes, you have that parental bond, but you don't need your parents for the same stuff. And it's almost that misunderstanding of I still need this validation, I still need this care, I still need all this stuff, and not understanding that we don't actually need it. Physically, we don't actually need it. It feels nice, but we don't actually need it. And when we don't have that with our parents, we're not relying on them for that. In a way, we are breaking that power dynamic of I'm not giving away my power to these people who refuse to give me an apology, refuse to acknowledge what I'm doing. And so I'm stuck here as basically a hurt little child, refusing to grow up until they take care of me. And
Mm.
that dynamic into okay, maybe that's what I feel would feel really nice, but really, who am I now right now? I'm a full-grown adult with my fully autonomous ability to make decisions and have my own life. And I am an adult and I'm gonna break the cycle that used to be and build a new cycle with them. But the first one needs to be broken.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of people are trying to do is build that new cycle as an adult. I want them to respect me. I want them to take accountability for how they hurt me while the child dynamic is still intact. And that's what gets so confusing because you're not trying to create a new one. You're just trying to rewrite an old one that isn't that way anymore. You're not a child. So I don't
Mm.
know if my analogies make
No, it's
sense.
that
I'm doing a lot of body language and
transactional analysis. Yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah,
different,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean that's a huge thing. So rupturing that relationship and then putting boundaries and then yes, knowing what do I need as a an adult woman, a healed woman, a woman who does now have different needs than she did as a child. And when you do the work through therapy, through trauma care, you're then healing those inner child parts of you that are wounded. You're nurturing them, you're helping them to grow, you're helping them not to be that needy child that still like is needing your parent because you've taken care of yourself. And now you can then meet them in a place where maybe they will meet you, maybe they won't. But then it also gives them a chance to then build a new relationship with you. They will always have to acknowledge the ways that they wronged you as a child, and that's on them, you know? And you can't do that work for them. You really can't. And even by trying to say, no, it was all fine, it was all good, you didn't do anything wrong, but you did the best that you could, that's not helping them either because deep down, they know they failed. Deep down, they know even if they're in denial, they know somehow that what they did was wrong. You know when you've wronged your children. Anyone who has, the least bit of self-awareness, just even as a parent, I think deep down inside you know. So when your child's telling you, no, everything's fine, but you know it's not true, it's like, where do you go? Where, and
yeah,
then you have this kind of out, well, they're saying it's fine, but then you're kind of allowing them to perpetuate the lie. But if you say, no, I'm doing the work. You don't have to worry about keeping that, unhealthy, toxic, abusive relationship. I'm doing that. I'm taking care of that. I want to reconnect with you as an adult. I want to not talk about what happened back then. You will have to talk about it, but let's not always go back to that point. Meet me here and now. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Let's have a tea. Don't always go back to that point, but say, how do you want to connect with me now, mom and dad? How are we going to relate to each other in this moment here and now? So I think that's what I started to do with mom and dad at different points. And when you open up the floor to have those conversations, when they know you've released them from the lie that everything was fine and everything was perfect, it actually is a relief. They
mm-hmm.
know that they don't have to then kind of, because almost in a way as a child, sorry, going back, if you're saying my childhood was fine, they then have to continue to keep up that facade because otherwise they then threaten your sense of what your childhood was like. But if you're saying, nah, let's throw that lie, let's throw that out the window, we all know it wasn't true, they then can be like, oh, okay, all right, that cat is out of the bag. Now what are we going to do with this mess? But you have to say it was a mess. You have to say it was broken. You have to say it really shouldn't have been that way. And then and then it's up to them. You've kind of done the hard part in upsetting the apple cart, like you said, and then they can say, okay, well, what do I want to do from here? Do I want a relationship with my adult child? Do I want to have a relationship with my grandchildren? Do I want to start to make amends? They have to ask themselves that question. You've made it easy for them as much as you can make trauma and childhood easy, but then they then have a choice, right? But if you immediately just go, no contact, blah, 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 I'm shutting down, putting everything down, not letting, you never give them that chance. And I think we all deserve a chance, right? I mean, we want a chance for our own broken relationships with our own children. Like, are we big enough? Are we, can we give our parents that chance? I don't know. I think you and I, we realized that we really did want to give our parents that chance. And, no, deep down, they were really hurt as well. They had their own traumas when we actually hear mom and dad's stories. And that's the thing. Again, doing our own work gives us the capacity and the compassion to hold space for their stories. And they may have never been able to do that for anyone before. I mean, you're not supposed to have like dual relationships, right? But it's not in that sense. It's not therapeutic. You're not their counselor. You're not the therapist. Who are you? You're a woman who's sitting with another woman who also had her reproductive rights taken away from her, who also, had to endure abuse, who also had her children taken away from her. In so many senses, there are so many similarities. And that's who you are. That is the relationship in that moment. So, I mean, if we want people to do that for us, and we have had people do that for us, like, why wouldn't we want to do that for our own parents? So, yeah.
And I know a lot of kids go, well, we're not our parents' therapists. It's not our job to raise our parents. And again, we're going back to that child parent dynamic. Yes, in that way, of course, we're not supposed to raise our parents. Once that bond and that dynamic is broken, we're always going to have that, but that should not be the primary relationship we have. Once you break that child parent bond, and you are now adult to adult, like you said, woman to woman. And that's what I saw sitting there at the table with mom at, I don't know how many hours, like 3.5 hours or something, and just having her tell me her story. And I was just like, this is another woman who I can totally relate to. Not as a a child. I wasn't listening to her as her child. I was listening to her as another woman. And the stuff and almost like mom to mom as well. And
Mm.
listening to the decisions that she had to make as
Oh,
a mom and like the dilemma she got into, and like I thought I was making the best decision, but I didn't feel I had a way out. And it gave me so much compassion for her because I was like, I can't imagine pain you must have felt being separated from your children, feeling you had no other option. And I can't imagine not being able to make decisions for yourself because you didn't have any money and weren't able to have choice and all this stuff. I wasn't thinking of, okay, and because a result of that, then it hurt me as a child. I was there listening to her as a woman as a mom to mom, and it made such a huge difference. And I think if we can step out of our child self and just listen as a woman, listen as a human being to this other person, and almost forget what that bond is, because you're not looking for connections of how it made your life terrible. You're just listening. It really makes a huge difference. And I left that conversation like my mind was blown. And I mean, I knew a bit of her story, but I already felt a lot of compassion for her. But even just kind of hearing even more of what she went through and the decision she had to make. And I was like, wow, mom, like I really, really respect you. And it totally changed I feel my relationship with her. And that just happened last summer.
yeah.
So yeah, I think it does make a big difference once we can stop feeling like a victim. And of course, all that work needs to be done. I'm not saying throw it aside and just never look at it again, but I think even having initial conversations where you're like, my goal here is not to get justice, not to get answers and reasons. It's just to hear their experience. And I'm listening to her as a woman. I'm listening to her as a mom to
Mm.
mom, right? Yeah, I feel like that can make a lot of difference. I mean, I know it did for me. I don't know if other people are able to do that, but yeah, it was a really powerful experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've both experienced our relationship with our parents heal and grow and become something that I think in another life, or even not even another life, this life, just maybe several months or a year ago, that we couldn't have imagined our relationship with them being this way. And I think we're both grateful that we have those conversations, we let it be difficult, we let there be rupture, we let there be time, we let there be times where there was, a lot of angst, a lot of uncertainty, even between you and myself. Like, you had one approach and I had another approach, but we were in it, we were willing to, grapple and struggle with these difficulties. and know that it's not easy. Know that, you know, we may not ever see the outcome that we want, but knowing that we're fighting and we're doing something that's it's worthy, it's valuable. And yeah, let's, do this work for ourselves and for our families. And
Mhm.
yeah, so we've talked about a relationship with our kids, with our parents, and if we look now at a relationship with, let's say, our romantic relationships and our spouses, how has been, how has our kind of like our personal healing journey and the work that we've done, how has this come up in our romantic relationships? What have we learned? How have we grown? Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we both had relationships that were not safe for us and not very nurturing. And um, yeah, I feel like, and again, I talk about it in, some of our earlier podcasts about how my need to be accepted so bad above everything, above my intuition telling me that it probably wasn't right or wasn't safe or the circumstances were correct or whatever. And I just went against all of that. And because I wanted this so bad, I wanted to be accepted. And I know this about myself when I get my mind, I'm a Libra, so I go back and forth and I weigh up all the options. But when I set my mind to something, I'm super determined, like freaking, Chinese ox. So just like, you know, uh, super unstoppable. But unfortunately, that also led me to I think that bias or something where it's called like the sunk cost fallacy or the sunk cost bias, something like that. When you invest in something and you put a lot of time and effort into something, even when you know it's going wrong, you're just like, no, 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 no. I've already invested so much in this. It's got to keep going. I've got to make it work, right? And you'll totally throw aside any of the hints that this is like all the red flags. You're just going to completely ignore them. I think someone said, "Oh, I read it yesterday," and they said, "I took all the red flags I found in you, and I created a cape for myself to save you." And I was like, "Wow, that's like super like amazing and impactful." But yeah, I guess my first marriage was with somebody who also grew up in the cult with us, and so I almost gave him a little bit of I kept, kind of giving excuses for his behavior. Well, he's had a tough life and, grew up the same way as I did. It's funny, I didn't give myself that same grace or that same compassion, but I gave a lot to him and I kind of made excuses for a lot of his bad behavior and kind of digging myself deeper and deeper into this hole of believing all this damaging rhetoric that he would tell me, right? Knowing how little we know about ourselves as a teenager and how our personality is really just developing, any kind of input during that time, which is why I work with teens and stuff about making sure that you have the same values and the messages that you're getting because they're so impactful to your sense of self as a young woman, all this messaging you're getting from in your young to late teens.
Mhm.
um, and so I think I picked up a lot of really negative messages about myself, about my intelligence, about my looks, about my ability, about my well, I guess this person must be right about me. Sometimes, you give away your power to other people. I guess they know more than me. I guess that they see things about me that I don't see about myself. And kind of going into my second relationship, the one with my kid's dad, having this really low sense, like scraping the bottom of the barrel self-worth, where I was just like, I am willing to be treated in a certain way. I'm willing to not be respected. All my self worth, all my autonomy and power, I'll just give it to you as long as you don't leave me. And I even said something to that effect when we first got together. Um, yeah, and it was just, came from a place of such like just this really deep desire to be needed and chosen and accepted.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, kind of going through my 20s like that. And then being a mom changed things in me. I was just like, I can't afford to be such a weak person, right? I've got to be strong for my kids. And that's when I think I started getting a bit of my self worth back as I started to notice what a good mom I was. Yes, I had my faults and flaws, but actually, I was a really good mom and I was very caring. And we did lots of fun things. And I was like, all this messaging that I was incapable and I was didn't make good decisions. Actually, that's not true. And I started to see more and more in my actions that all that stuff was untrue. And then getting a job. And I think this was something that was told to us in the cult growing up, that if we left the cult, we were going to be strippers or burger flippers, right? Or just,
McDonald's,
yeah,
yes.
burger flippers if you're a boy, and a stripper or a hooker if you were a girl, or you were going to die, end up as some drug addict on the street. That's the message we were given. And so I think that impacted a lot of us when we left of, am I going to be able to provide for myself? Am I going to be living on the street, a homeless person? And then when you have kids, it's almost, now I have somebody else to take care of. Am I going to be able to provide for them? And then gradually seeing that even with our limited education, I was, every single job I applied to, whether it was in education, whether it was as a cook, whether it was as a model, whether it was, I applied to positions I really had no clue what I was doing. I applied to be like a dance instructor for like the performers at some big club. I hadn't done that before. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I applied to be the head chef at some restaurant. I had cooking experience at home. I had no idea how to run a kitchen. I applied for that. I got it. Right. It was every single time I tried something, I managed to succeed. And it slowly started to change my beliefs about myself, that I was, even though I was seeing that happening in my day-to-day life, there was still these core beliefs that didn't change. Like, you make bad decisions, you aren't worth it. Like, yeah. And, not going too much into my relationship with my kid's dad. Um, but I think, learn a lot about myself in that process. And I think my therapist calls it these two kinds of people that come into your life. One are white teachers, not talking about race here, but energy wise. Some are white teachers, some are black teachers. White teachers are people who teach you something uh, because of their actions in a positive way, right? These are the people who inspire us and whatever. Other people, we call them black teachers. They are people who will teach us something when the experience goes wrong, and we'll learn a lesson because of it. So I look at kind of both my past relationships. They were both teachers for me, but they were teachers in a really painful way, right? And I came out with a lot of baggage in that. And I remember writing into I think writing into this podcast that I used to listen to like 15 years ago. And I remember just saying, like, is it bad to want more? Like, I have this idea, like we talk about, we really value growth and personal growth and healing and all of that stuff. And I guess I didn't know about values when I got together with my kid's dad. And it seems like our values are a bit different in this area. Is it bad to want more? Right? Like, and I think the question I asked is, what is settling versus what is always looking for the next best thing? Some people just can't wait to, work their way up the ladder and the next best thing. They're never content. But a lot of people settle as well. So I said, what's the healthy balance? And she did say something like, no, it's not unusual it's not, there's nothing wrong with wanting more, with wanting deep connection and good communication and just, a sense of safety and respect. It's not weird to want those things. It's weird that people don't want these things. And so I think at that time I was being told that you watch too many movies. You have this fairy tale view of what relationships should be like, how people should communicate with each other deeply about their emotions and love spending time together. Marriage isn't like that. Marriage is like basically your two roommates and you get along. And I was like, is that what it is? That's not what I want. I want like a deep, meaningful connection with my partner. And someone's telling me that that's not what relationships are. And actually, as I look around at other people, that's all I'm seeing as well. They're just barely getting by. And I'm like, is that what it is? And then speaking to this woman who was a relationship expert, and her saying, no, there are beautiful, beautiful relationships, but you have to strive for them. Obviously, you both have to be working towards them. And I think that was the catalyst I needed. That was like, yeah, like I can't be the only one working in this relationship. If my partner doesn't want to, and I've given him the option, then I guess I've outgrown him. Maybe it's time for me to go. 13, I'd never been single. And this was me in my late 20s going, shoot, I've got to be by myself now. I've got to figure out what I want and all this stuff. And it was really scary. But yeah, I think making all of those connections and finally realizing that I was worth more and that it was possible to have that kind of relationship. And my husband and I talk now about how we both weren't looking for anything. And literally, the way we met online, we could have missed each other so easily. So, I'm not yes, I love angel numbers and synchronicities and stuff, but I truly believe the way we met was like it was meant to happen, it was meant to be. And obviously, he came into our relationship with baggage from his own relationships. But the way that we kind of connected and talked about the deepest things. And he was like, "You're really intense. You're asking me like what I want for my life," like one of our first conversations. And I was just like, you know what? I'm in my 30s now. I don't have time to waste time. Like, I want to see, is this gonna, like, do you want what I want? First of all, do you have the same level of understanding about emotions and you want more in relationships? Um, yeah, and I just feel like when we first got together, trauma bonded a little bit, I think, but at the same time, we've both been so good for each other in that we have really highlighted each other's areas of work that we needed to work on. And both of ours, I incidentally, was being able to speak up for ourselves and advocate for ourselves in the context of a relationship, because both of us were the let's go into our rooms and hide and like avoidant partners, and putting two avoidant partners together, kind of interesting. So yeah, that's taught us a lot. Yeah.
As you're talking about how you're together because you bring out, it's interesting because you often hear you bring out the best in each other. You're together
Mm.
because you both bring out the best in each other, and
Mm.
you what is it? You complete me, and there's all of
Completely,
that.
yeah.
And I think that that is, while it's, idealistic and it sounds really nice, you really hit on the key point, and the key truth is you together and you help each other heal from the kind of wounds or the emotional baggage. You help each other maybe process or deal with or start to unpack and then get rid of whatever is not needed anymore, and then nicely put on the shelves what is still needed and what is, helpful in your current relationship. But it's like, yeah, it's so much more about how can you help each other to, because we all come into our relationships with some trauma, big T traumas, little T traumas, right? And isn't it more about that? Those are the things that will break you. It's not about having all these wonderful personality traits and attributes, and I have this strength and we have these hobbies, and that's all great. That's all good. We can talk about that all day, but what's going to break the relationship or what's going to actually cause the conflict and the difficulties is not how beautiful and wonderful and great and celebrity like you all are. It's the dark bits, right? It's the traumas, it's the wounds, it's the things that you're all keeping hidden and like, I don't even want to look at this myself. I definitely don't want my partner to ever know about it, right?
Exactly. Yes.
But
Yeah.
if you then enter into the relationship saying, "Hey, I've got this stuff. I know you have it," even if you're saying you're not, I know you do. Um, are you able, and not are you even, are you strong enough to, but do you have the willingness to let me work on mine and let us work on yours and let us work on them together? Isn't that like much more realistic and like grounded and like just natural way of like looking at relationships? And I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's the truth in relationships. It's like, how can you stay together and how can you help each other go forward in
Mm.
spite of those things or because of those things rather
Those
than
things. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
more truthful, I think.
Yeah. But of course, there are some people who are like, well, I'm in a relationship with this person and I'm starting to maybe explore therapy and all the stuff's coming up and I bring it to my partner and they're not a safe person at all to bring this up with. And I'm like, yeah, that is really tricky.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I think what you said is like, are you willing to? For me, it's again, it comes down to safety. Are you a safe person I can explore this stuff with? Okay, I'm going to take the bulk of the responsibility of dealing with my stuff. And you should take the bulk of responsibility of dealing with your stuff. But then there's also our stuff. And
Our
are we going to work on this together? Right.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it's just I will try to do my best to be a safe person for you to work on your stuff with,
Mhm.
and vice versa. I'd like you to be that for me, and let's try to both work on it. Yeah, work on it together. And I think for a lot of people, they get into relationships and maybe they want to start showing those little nasty little bits of themselves they don't like about themselves to their partner. And there's always this theme, are you going to accept me? Is this going to be too much for you? Right. And if we get the message of, oh, when I cry, I have a temper tantrum as a child and you get sent to your room because you're being too much, we have that same expectation of when I show this not perfect part of myself to you, are you going to send me away? Are you going to reject me?
Mm.
So I think it's just literally kind of like, pulling back the rug, look at that, a little bit more. Like it's like, are you gonna make a big deal of it? Are you gonna be like, oh, and here's mine, right?
Yeah.
And it's that matching. It's like I'll show you
I'll show
mine, and
you.
I'll
I'll
show you
show
mine,
mine.
yours. Kind of that. That's what we want to have, right? In the
Yeah.
relationship. Can I be vulnerable with you? Can I show you this part of me that I'm really embarrassed about? But you're gonna be like, oh yeah, you got that. Look at mine, right?
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, I can't believe you have so much dirt under your rug. Oh, my rug is perfect, right? That's the unsafe relationships. That's the one we don't want to get into, where you
Yeah.
show that vulnerability and you're met with, I can't believe what a terrible person you are. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
recreate that experience that you had with your parents. So
Mhm.
yeah, tricky, tricky.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So I think like if I'm to answer a similar question, for me, the ways that noticing what my, you could say, noticing what my, baggage is, or noticing what my traumas are, my wounds, noticing how they still impact me in my current relationship, and then, what can I do about that? There's a couple of things, but just going back to touch on something you said, you were saying like something when, say you are already in a relationship, and then it's
Mm.
while you're in it that you then start to say, I do want to grow. I do, maybe I want to try therapy, or, something like that. And then you start, and then you're like, oh, wait a second. Is my partner, first of all, are they okay with me doing that? Of course they should be. Two, are they willing to do any of the work themselves? Like, meet me halfway? Or if not, are they a safe space? Or are they a safe person that I can explore some of these things with? And I think there's several answers to that. And I think that it's not very cut and dry, and there's no right or wrong. I think a lot of it, like you said, it is balance, right? It is really, really nice, ideally, if your partner is, you had your therapy on Monday at 1 to 2, and they have their therapy on Friday from 3 to 4, and you both meet, like maybe on the weekend, and like talk to each other about, this is what I learned. I mean, but how realistic is that? And how often is that going to happen? Um, so if in a sense you're doing a lot of work, and maybe they're like, no, I'm good. You do yours and I'll do mine. I'll just, then when you are bringing stuff to them, because of course you're like with the Yohari's window, there are your, known spots, there are your unknown spots, there are your blind spots and your hidden spots, and all these things are coming up. And I mean, maybe not everyone is the way, we are mixed, but it is quite fascinating. And it's like you're almost like you're discovering, it's like watch, I mean, for me, having therapy, not all the time, but sometimes it's like, watching another episode in your favorite TV program, and you're like, this character is coming to life. And who is this character? It's you,
It's me. I'm the main
Yeah,
character.
I'm the main character. Exactly. And it's really interesting. And I think another thing is that you can finally start, you're like, another part of it's like, oh, there's like this little baby, or this little part of yourself, which, had to be like hidden or unloved or just gone for years. And you're slowly like saying, no, it's a safe place. Come here. And it's really, I mean, for me, it's a really beautiful experience. So you want to share that with someone, and even more so, you want to be like, oh, and my partner has, the same potential as well. You want that, but sometimes it's going to happen and sometimes not. So at the end of the day, like what I'm learning is that sometimes, yes, I will be able to bring things to my partner, and sometimes they'll be interested. Sometimes they'll have had a long day. Sometimes they'll have had a long week, and sometimes there'll just be a lot of, negative stuff happen in the office. So sometimes I will be able to bring things, and sometimes I won't. And I think for me, what I'm also learning, and you've mentioned this before, is like, where are those safe spaces? Where are those safe people and those safe communities where you can share? Because it is such an integral part of the learning experience, is that you need someone to witness your growth and development. You need someone to celebrate your wins. And if
Mhm.
you can't do that with your partner, then is that going to be make or break between you because they then say, no, this isn't for me or right now, or they're at a different point in their life? It shouldn't be. So if we can find those safe places, absolutely do that. And just know sometimes maybe you will just only have that 1 hour or 50 minutes with your therapist. And maybe that's all you get. But throughout the rest of the week, you can do journaling. There is a lot you can do on your own. It still is a bit, like, yay, and then anticlimactic. But that also works for some people. But then there are moments and there are times that I can share with him what I am going through. And there are times where I notice that my openness to therapy and my openness to discovering new things about myself, or even just to be very, very vulnerable. He says, wow, I'm not that way. I'm quite reserved and quite skeptical. The fact that you can do that really makes me, admire you. And so there have been some of those really beautiful moments where I've been like, oh, he really loves that about me. It's not like that all the time, but you can take those kind of beautiful, really precious moments and kind of, just put them aside. And the other thing that I'm noticing is that when I have like, okay, so there was this one incident where this was early on in our relationship. So we were engaged, we were planning to be married. Um, I was learning how to be in a relationship, in a healthy relationship, but you can only be in a relationship and process what was kind of went wrong before. So here's the setup. So I'm at the kitchen counter, I'm washing dishes, and he comes downstairs and he asks me, he says, do you know what happened to the shower? What is it, like the kind of the little bracket that hangs, yeah, the
Oh, the
shower head?
bracket.
What happened to it? And I didn't realize this at the time. I thought I just put it in, it was fine. But what I had actually done, I had broken it. And I just put the shower head back on and thought it had all been fine. But a little piece had actually broken. And so I said, oh, yeah, I think I may have actually broken it. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it at the time. And I could see, he doesn't like things being broken. He likes things to be in a certain way. And of course, we all do. Um, so I said something kind of like, oh, can you just fix it or can you just get another piece for it? And he said something like, well, that's not how the real world works. At that moment, I felt like that little 5 year old or that little 7 year old who was basically being told, you know, whatever, fill in the blank. I felt that small and that little again. And I could feel like the emotions from that experience coming up. And that was, I think, the first time I noticed being in you could say, a more healthy or more mature or evolved relationship, or a relationship where I felt so much safer than I had ever felt in the past. The fact that I noticed, oh, wow, I'm feeling like a 7 year old being told off for something that she did wrong and maybe going to get in trouble, like big trouble, like a spanking or a beating or a punishment. I'm feeling that now. So I'm there washing the dishes now. And I think he picked up on how I was feeling. And then he picked up on kind of even like his tone or what he said to me. And we were able to notice in that moment, oh, it was that moment, or maybe a few moments later, what had happened. And I said, I felt like a little girl who had done something wrong, who had broken something, who was about to get in trouble because of your tone. He said, yeah, that was probably a bit harsh. And so, sometimes it's just those moments of noticing, like, I'm feeling this way, and someone else, maybe they will pick up on it, maybe not. If he hadn't, I then maybe would have gone to him and said, what happened with the shower handle? When you said that in that tone of voice, it made me feel like a 7 year old little girl who's just about to get in trouble. And that happened to me so many times in my life. And I know him well enough now that if I choose the right time and place, he will be open enough to me to say, he may not know exactly how to respond. And that's, a learning journey that he's on himself. But I know that my voice is valued, and I know that he has a desire, like I said, that willingness to keep me safe and to go through that process, even if there are little bumps in the road. So that's just like noticing that, like I said, I think in our last episode, that even in healthy relationships, unhealthy things can happen. But when you're committed and when you're talking and when you're bringing the work that you're doing from therapy and that trauma care and healing into your relationship, you know, good things happen. maybe
Yeah.
not like fireworks and everything, but you have a sense that the work that I'm doing is making a difference in this relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that is like, again, and when you're explaining this, the first time I heard that story, I'm like, oh, I love it. But I think I'm part of healing. We talk about having disconfirming experiences, right? Right. Uh, this original incident happened and it was repeated over time and time again and time again, probably in different settings. But as I got older, similar outcomes, and it made me feel a certain way, and repeating it over and over again. And then this becomes a belief in my head because of this repeating incident or repeating set of things that gave me a certain belief about myself. And so we are all adults carrying around these big, heavy, we talk about, emotional backpack and carrying around this big, heavy thing. And the belief is I'm not good enough or I'm going to get in trouble or what's wrong with me, I always break things. Or for me it was yeah, I guess I'm not good enough, or I need to always make sure that everybody else is okay, or I'm not, like, everyone else needs to be okay, or I'm not going to be okay. And when we have um something that happens in our life and we're expecting a certain outcome because this is what happened every single time in the past, and something changes, the person responds to us in a different way. And it all of a sudden, it's like a pattern interrupt in our heads. Like, wait, I was expecting that outcome, but this one happened. And for me, I had a couple of these really big disconfirming experiences with my husband where I was behaving in this way. And I was like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen because in the past, when I behaved this way with my ex or my previous relationships, they always responded in this way. And so this is what's going to happen. This is like the normal thing to happen. And my husband responded differently. And it was such a shock to my system of, oh, wow, this belief that I have about myself, it may not be true because it didn't happen again. If this was true, it would have happened the same way it did before, but it didn't. And so it kind of, and then obviously repeating, obviously having a safe, consistent partner who knows your triggers and knows when you respond in this way, this is what's going on with you. And so they need to respond in this way to help you heal. And so I found that my husband, Mike, he really, really was very good at helping me have these multiple disconfirming experiences. And then later on, when I talked about it, like, this is what was happening when I was having that huge meltdown and I was expecting you to have this reaction. You came over and gave me a big hug instead. And this is what was happening internally. Like, it healed a part of me. And him going, yeah, I know. Like, we talked so much about your past experiences and all this happened and all the beliefs that you had because of this. And so, yes, why would I feed into that damaging belief you had about yourself? Of course, that's not true. And so I'm going to treat you like this person who I know you are rather than this person you believe you are. And so that was just like so healing. And I think, like you said, that is what made a really big difference. And that's when you know you're with the right person, right? When they can maybe step outside themselves and what they want to do. Because sure, I'm going to leave her crying, serves her right, kind of like what my exes used to do. Of we've gotten so upset, we've ended up yelling at each other. She's broken down, crying in the corner, and I walk out going, so what? I'm right, I won, and leave. Instead, I'm going to be like, wow, I really said something that hurt her. Yes, I won, but I realize in the long term of our relationship, unless I repair this and go and support her, it's going to damage our relationship. And so the difference between, is it two people against each other in the relationship and you're just vying to win, or are you working for the long-term benefit of your relationship? And I think that's really what makes the difference and really what makes a mature partner. And I sometimes have to put myself into that. Like, do I want, in the past, I was like, I want to be right. I want to be right so badly. Do I want to be right that it's going to hurt our relationship in the long run? Or do I want to kind of just, take a bit of the humble seat and not, or bite my tongue, or come back and check on him and do the, make the first step to repair rather than I'm going to wait for him to come and apologize to me first, right? It's thinking about the long-term success of your relationship. And I think, yeah, obviously a successful relationship needs two people that do that. But yeah, having a partner who's willing to know your past and your triggers and be like, oh, that just happened right there. And being so aware of it and then being, okay, I need to come in and I'm going to help her heal from this. And Ah, beautiful. Yeah.
It is. Oh, I love that. And I think it's that self-awareness as well. Like you said, you caught yourself. You're like, okay, how do I want to be? And I think that's when someone else models that for you and provides that to you, then that again, as we were talking about, giving our parents a chance or giving, certain relationships a chance. When they've done that for us, we then, it puts you in a position where you're like, oh yeah, I want to do the same. I want to be that bigger person. I also want to learn and grow and mature when someone's provided that to you. So, yeah. Well,
Mm,
um, I think we covered, I mean, of course, we could continue to go on indefinitely.
a lot more.
We probably covered the most important points of like, yeah, ourself in healing, our relationship with ourself, and then the people around us, who we love. Um, do we have any final thoughts about relationships that maybe are more pertinent to anything that has been coming up for us or that we see, or more like, yeah.
I get for me, it always just comes back down to it's so tempting to want to make sure that all the conditions outside ourselves, all the people outside of ourselves, our husbands, our parents, our kids, they're all right and have created the environment, the perfect environment for us to heal.
Mm.
And for me, I'm just like, especially as someone we were talking about, giving away your personal power. And I think we didn't really cover that too much in the session, but for me, I'm like, it's all about choice, having grown up in the way that we have and not having the choice and not having autonomy and not having the personal power to, or feeling like we didn't have the personal power to affect any real change in our lives, that I will never let that happen again to me. And maybe I go to the opposite extreme. My therapist did say that sometimes you take a bit too much responsibility and actually you need to give that to some other people where it is theirs. And so I'm learning how to do that. But I guess not giving away your personal power and thinking that other people need to first do something in order for you to be healed, or in order for you to start that healing journey.
Mm.
That in our minds, that's how it has to be, because our minds are always looking for justice and right. But the way that I think we've both found, and I'm telling you about this, and you were just like, oh, I don't get it. And then you're like, oh, yeah, that's true. But I still don't understand how it happens. But when we do the work and we start with us first, and you're just like, okay, I would love for them to give me this first. I would love for, before we start healing our relationship, for them to acknowledge stuff. And you know what? I'm going to start with what I can first.
Mm.
And understanding that the dynamics have to change between you and your parents. You're no longer a child. And I'm going to stop giving my power away to my parents because they may or may not be ready to give me what I need. And as long as I stay in this child dynamic, I'm going to constantly be at their mercy, and I'm not going to give them that anymore. Do it from a place of anger of they took away, they hurt me as a child. I'm not going to let them hurt me anymore. That's one way. Another way is compassion, being like, you know what? They're adults. They have their own stuff. They have their own trauma to deal with. I've got my own. But I'm not going to let their trauma and their inability to acknowledge or apologize. I'm not going to let them affect my healing. I am worth more than that. I deserve to heal. I deserve to be a happy, healthy adult. I'm not going to let my parents have that power over my life. And so once we start taking that accountability, I feel like that's kind of almost the linchpin that gets everything started.
Mm.
And and yeah, like you said, it kind of almost gives them a bit of, oh, okay, they're not scot-free, but then the dynamic changes where we get choices. We get to choose as adults whether or not we want to have a relationship with our parents based on their behavior. We don't need to have a relationship. You see, when we need something, we give that away our power. When it's a choice and saying, I don't need to, I've given myself the love and attention and care I needed as a child, and I continue to do that for myself by reparenting myself. I don't need you anymore, right? And then their decisions are really important because, oh wow, she doesn't need us. So if she chooses to have a relationship with us, this is based on who we are, right? And who we've shown up for her as now as an adult.
Right.
So yeah. I think that was kind of a realization that I had in my healing journey. And yeah, just what I want to share with people, because I think there is a lot of confusion about
Mm.
our relationship with our parents.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's very true. And I think that's kind of what you and I have learned and experienced. For me, I think one of the things that I recently have, it's kind of been a bit of a, let's say, a focal point for myself, and something I've noticed is I think for those of us, especially who have come from, so you and I were born and raised in a cult, which was very abusive and which did do a number on, our development, our identity, our belief about ourselves, our ability to, just function in the world. And we know we've had to do a lot of work and a lot of healing. There comes this point, I think, and I've seen it in myself, where I have a need, and I think these needs are healthy, right? We have a need to let our voice be heard, to have our voice respected, to be taken seriously, to not be dismissed, to not be minimized, to not be gaslit, all those things, to be validated, to be acknowledged, and to be valued and celebrated and loved, all those things, and to be able to put boundaries in place and to be able to have those boundaries respected. So all of those needs, which we should have had we should have known we were allowed to have those needs, and those needs should have been met, in our formative years. We're only doing that as adults, and as adults these things then become very, very important, and they should, and we have to place a lot of focus and priority on them, because we know what happens when those things are not present, and it's like you said, never let that happen again, lest we forget, we are not going to let people take advantage of us. We are not going to be hoodwinked. We are. The downside with that then is we focus so much on, we start acting from a place of fear. Never again, I'm not going to, blah, 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 fill in the blank. We have a list as long as our arm. And we want these things for ourselves, and we're desperate for these things to be met. And we kind of go into this place where we lock ourselves into this way of thinking, if it doesn't look like this, it's going to look like this. And we become quite rigid, or
Yeah.
maybe we always are. Maybe we always have been rigid, but we've exchanged one rigidity or one rigid system for another rigidity or another system. And it needs to be this, and this. And it needs to look like this, and this. Otherwise, it means this is going to happen. So I started noticing this in myself, where I need my relationship to look a certain way. Like you said, my partner needs to be a certain way. My family needs to look a certain way. My community needs to look a certain way. Society needs to look a certain way. Everything needs to look a certain way in order for me to be okay, right? And we may get our ideals from, good places, the right places, those could all be very good aspirations, good ideals. But our commitment to needing everything to be a certain way actually is a trauma response, and
Mhm.
actually isn't very far off from where we were to begin with in the beginning, And you and I were talking about this other day. It's kind of like our operating system is still the same, and we've not updated it and we've not changed it. We're still operating in the same way, and we can be exposed to new information, new data, new education, new books, new speakers. We can be like, oh, this is what we were missing. But if our operating system is still dysfunctional and faulty and full of glitches and bugs and viruses, we're never going to be able to do much more with all that great wealth of knowledge and information than that faulty system will allow us to. And unless we're actually going to go and say, whoa, let's see what's wrong here. Let's update, or let's completely change it, and let's put in a new operating system. We're kind of going to be we're still going to be traumatized in a sense. And the outside can look very, very different, but nothing actually really has changed. And so the way how we're functioning and how we're going about life and how we're seeing things and engaging with people and relating to maybe a new environment is going to be the same as it was before. It's not going to be from a place of love. It's going to be from a place of fear, you know?
Mhm.
So I started noticing this about myself. Oh yeah, so I have my boundaries and I need people to respect them and I need things to be a certain way and certain way. And I realized, wow, I've kind of become my own, I don't know, like in a way, in a sense, like my own abuser
Mm,
because I I have things it needs to be just so, or I don't give myself a break and I don't give anybody else a break. And I started kind of like noticing a lot of narcissistic traits in myself that I was so sure that I was like seeing in everybody around me. But I was like, oh wow, but look at, you know, look here. And so I kind of like just gave myself a bit of a break and like needing things to be a certain way. And I think therapy, this I've had a therapist that I've been working with for a couple of months now. So this latest stint of therapy has helped me really to like notice some of the ways I had almost conditioned myself to needing the world to be a certain way in order for me to be safe, in order for me to be validated, acknowledged, all this whole list of things that I needed to heal and be healed. But in wanting that so badly, I was actually like just perpetuating that same like unsafety, or you know what I mean? So I'm kind of waffling on a long time here now. So that's what I'm learning kind of in relationships is not to be so committed to this need for everything to be just so, because that's very fragmented. That's very kind of like black and white thinking and either this or this.
mm,
And what we're doing in therapy and healing our traumas is looking to integrate, right? Looking to process that data and process those experiences instead of thinking, oh, it was just this way or this way, and demonizing everyone and everything if it's not. So I'm learning that actually that in itself is a trauma response, that need for certainty and for things to be just so, instead of saying, well, actually, there's a whole array of things. And actually, like you said, it doesn't mean that you have to then change your way of thinking or be like, yes, we're going to endorse this or we're going to go this way. It's about just
yeah.
understanding and offering compassion and acceptance first to yourself. Because if you can't offer that to yourself, there's no way that you're going to be able to do that for anybody else. So starting with yourself and just kind of sitting back and being like, actually, things don't need to be just so in order for me to be okay, right? And that was the belief that we were brought up with, that things need to be a certain way, or. There were so many threats, so many dangers, so many us and them,
Yes.
us and the enemy. The enemy is at the gates, this sort of thing. And we're still kind of thinking in that way. So I'm like, oh, wow. I still have a lot of work to do. I am working on it, and mostly just being aware and noticing how I am in the here and now, there's still a lot of vestiges from the past in that. And if you can notice it and be aware of it and be like, oh, yeah, okay, now that didn't work before. It's probably not working for me now. Let's kind of do things a little differently. Yeah, so that's one thing I'm noticing a lot in my relationships and not needing things to be just so and so prescriptive and just allowing myself actually, this is safe, this is okay. It's sometimes it's not just how I like it, and that's all right. It's okay. Not everything needs to be just exactly to my, certain criteria. Life can go on, and yeah, yeah.
Hmm. But I think, like we were talking about, again, I always come back to safety because I feel like safety is such a huge need, and I think that's what we're seeing in the world today about when people don't feel safe, they fragment. They're polarized. It's like literally a magnet of I'm going to go back to my safe place. I'm going to go surround myself with my safe little bubble, and I'm not even going to step out into the middle to have discourse with the other side because I'm feeling so unsafe. All I need to do is just defend. It's armadillo. It's shutdown mode, right? And so when there is safety, but then I guess you also get the argument of, well, if the other side doesn't make it safe for me first, I'm not going to be the first one to venture out, right? I'm not even going to even say, but it needs to be from both sides. And we need to gradually be taking the steps. Unless you actually talk, how do you know if the other side is safe? You have these ideas, the other
Mm,
side's not safe, whatever. And that's what keeps you in your little armadillo shell, right? Your little castles throwing pot shots at each other, right?
right.
Look at any battle and war, you have to have discourse in order for you to actually find out what the other side wanted. And for me,
Mhm.
that's negotiation and maturity and all this stuff. It all happens. But it's totally a catch-22, because when people don't feel safe, they don't want to come out and talk. And when people don't come out and talk, they can't understand, they can't even begin to understand that the other side maybe isn't as dangerous as we thought they were, right? There is a balance. Everything is not black and white. There's a 50 shades of gray in between, not referencing the book.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's really so nuanced. And I think it's maturity in knowing. Because if we look at how children see the world, everything is black and white, good and bad, safe and unsafe, right? And as we get older, I love talking to kids about this, because we talked about it yesterday about, do your like little 3-year-old sister, do they understand? They know happy, sad, angry, and scared. Do they know discouraged? Do they know isolated? Do they know abandoned? No, they don't know the nuances. As you get older, you start to understand the world is so nuanced. And so it's a maturity in the way of thinking of that it's not black and white anymore. And actually, when we talk about those back to milk and cookies again, we go back to our childlike selves of the world is unsafe. I'm going to go in my blanket fort and eat milk and cookies, right? And then realizing, okay, actually, once I've comforted that inner child, that's the reparenting work, I can go back out into the world as a little bit more mature person and try to engage with other people a little bit more maturely. And that's when I'm probably going to find out my black and white thinking probably was not accurate, just like a child's view of the world is not accurate. It's the way they see things, and it's immature. So yeah, a lot of work to be done. Like you said, it all starts in ourselves. And I think I found myself being quite judgmental of the world. Why this? People are this.
Yeah.
And then I go back to my, oh, okay, come on, like a little bit more nuanced, and then back and white to black and white. So I think it for me, the real indicator of when we go back to our cave and put up our defenses, and when we are ready to go out into the world, it really starts with safety. And for me, safety starts with connection. Like, you can't feel safe I guess you can't feel safe by yourself, but what we really want to do is feel safe in connection with others. So catch 22, of course. But yeah, I guess it has to start somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think by having like conversations like this is what we're hoping to do for other people. It's just like, who can you take that little step out of your cave, have a conversation with somebody. Okay, if it feels unsafe, at least you tried, and go back into your cave and go hide. But don't just stay there, because isolation is so damaging. And we know that humans thrive on connection, and humans die without connection. So isolating yourself is not the answer.
No, you're right.
Hard as it is, we need to take a step out and try to engage with other people.
Yeah. And as you're talking about all of this, it reminds me so much of the way that we were brought up in a cult, with this kind of cult speak, and everyone else is the enemy and everyone else is wrong, and you have to stay within here. You have to have this very, very narrow mindset. It's only way, our way, or the highway, this same sort of thing. So I think if we can, be a bit reflective and be like, oh, well, where have we seen this before? Where have we heard this before? When did it not work out so well before? And do we really want to do that again? Do we really want to repeat all that? I think reflection, really just taking a beat, like we said at the very beginning, slowing down, just slowing down a bit when it's so chaotic and when it feels really, really heavy, just stopping and meditating and just taking a bit of time to kind of see what's happening. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a really good talk with you, Vix. Thanks so much. It was really nice to discuss relationships. I think it's something that's really close to both of our hearts, and I think we've done a lot of work to nurture and build and grow and help our relationships thrive. And yeah, we just would really love to create more spaces where people can have these conversations and just share and see what comes up, because like a lot of times when Vix and I are talking about what do we want to discuss in this podcast, we have things in our mind, but we say, let's just let it roll and let's just kind of see what comes up. And those are the things those things that are close to our heart and that we really want to talk about, and which we hopefully, feel will have an organic message for our audience. So we will see you guys next time. And we hope that you will also have a sense of being able to, just pause, relax, reflect, take a beat, and be able to nurture the important relationships in your life. Okay, guys, bye. See you all next time.